everyone, and thank you to the organizers for an opportunity to present these results on behalf of my co-investigators. I'm not sure if being up first is a blessing or a curse. At the moment, it's feeling slightly like a curse, but I should warm up as we go along. So to talk about Project Accept, NIMH Project Accept HPTN 043, I think context matters. It informs both the questions we ask in research and the subsequent actions we take in trying to address those issues. Almost 10 years ago, we started Project Accept, and at that time, there were a couple of key contextual issues that framed what we tried to do. At the time, the majority of persons in sub-Saharan Africa were unaware of their HIV status. I think many of us felt at the time that we were dealing with some quite severe limitations around the predominant model of voluntary counseling and testing at that time, which is a very clinic-based model that requires people to come to you that favored or focused on certain target groups and not others, and to a large extent seemed inaccessible to those target groups it was not reaching. Related to that was low motivation to seek HIV testing due to fear and stigma, and for the most part, HIV was silent and hidden. I think particularly important for this meeting, 10 years ago, we were not where we are with treatment rollout and treatment provision in many parts of the world. In fact, ART was slowly been rolled out through a number of national programs, including Tanzania and my home country in South Africa. And the global treatment response was just starting with the introduction of the Global Fund in 2002 and PEPFAR in 2003. So a really different context that framed our research. Our intention was, informed by theory, to design an intervention that would allow us to do a couple of things. Firstly, to destigmatize and normalize HIV testing, to enhance disclosure of HIV infection, to really try and stimulate change in communities and to take advantage of some of these community dynamics to effect a change in the way in which people were responding to HIV and AIDS, to capitalize on prevention opportunities that occur post the HIV test, and to refer infected individuals into care and uninfected persons into prevention service. A key question that occupied our mind then and really consumed us for much of the trial was trying to establish the degree to which large-scale population knowledge of HIV infection could reduce the scale of the epidemic. To our knowledge then, NIMH Project Accept HPTN 043 is the first community randomized trial designed to do the following things. Firstly, to test a combination of social, behavioral, and structural approaches for HIV prevention, to assess the impact of this integrated strategy on HIV incidence, and to assess the impact of a strategy for HIV prevention on behavioral and social outcomes, significantly all of these at the community level. The study was conducted in 48 communities in 5 study sites, roughly a community size of about 10,000 each in these study communities. Conducted in Thailand, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and 2 sites in South Africa, urban Soweto and rural Vulindlela, where I am based. Communities were randomized to 2 voluntary counseling and testing approaches. Community-based VCT was made up of a community preparation, outreach and mobilization, mobile VCT, post-test support services, which took the form of stigma reduction, skills training, coping effectiveness, and ongoing counseling support. And a fourth and critical part of our intervention was an ongoing data feedback and feedback loop and field adjustments as we went along and tried to implement this really large study. Standard VCT communities receive clinic-based VCT and other standard VCT services normally provided in that community. This is roughly what we try to do, to mobilize communities through social networks, through going door-to-door to their households, and through community events to mobilize community members to test for HIV. We then provided mobile VCT to people where they were in their locations, through transportation hubs at bus stops and taxi stops, through community events that were occurring. We try to make that service also much more accessible. And lastly, we link people to post-test support and also use those post-test support services as an opportunity to link people back into HIV testing. And as I said, data was a key component of that. So this is what we did for the last 10 years. Early on, started off with some pilot work in Zimbabwe and Thailand. About 2005, started the baseline behavioral survey, and then ran the intervention for about 3 years, from 2006 to 2009. And we've just completed our post-intervention assessment midway through last year. And this is what we found. Our process outcomes were evaluated through our utilization data, and amongst the 16 to 32-year-old target group, whom we felt were the greatest chance of highest incidence and therefore the greatest chance of trying to impact some change in that particular target group. 86,720 HIV tests were conducted. As you can see, significantly more tests, about 70,000 conducted in CBVCT communities and about 7,000 in standard communities. If we took out some of the repeat tests that occurred, we still were left with a significant number of people that were tested through this study. And we provided 140-odd post-test support visits. I think there are a couple of key things from this process data that we are particularly proud of, and I'll talk about a couple of those in the next few slides. The proportion of community members receiving VCT aged 16 to 32 was significantly higher in community-based VCT communities relative to standard VCT communities. Our testing rate in these three countries where we had comparative standard VCT utilization data, standard testing rates were in the range of about 40 to 70%. So really, population-level testing was possible through this approach. I think the second thing that we're particularly proud of is that we were able to achieve a gender equity and uptake of community-based VCT. You can see roughly the green and blue bars, almost 50% of males and females tested in all of our countries. Tanzania having a slightly greater number of men that they attracted to voluntary counseling and testing in the intervention communities. CBVCT allowed us to increase HIV case finding. The intervention produced an almost fourfold increase in the detection of previously undiagnosed HIV cases. And this was true at all of the three sites where differential utilization could be assessed. Our primary outcome, as I said at the beginning, was HIV incidence evaluated at the community level. And our goal here was to impact the entire community and not just a cohort of people. And so in effect, anyone in the community could participate in any of the community events, including mobile testing. Outcomes were evaluated at the end of the intervention using a probability sample of 54,000 community residents in the 18 to 32 age category, and we achieved a decent response rate of 89%. Incident infections were estimated using a multi-assay algorithm developed by the HPTN core lab at Hopkins and the core statistical unit at Sharp and Charles University. And so what did we find with respect to prevalence and estimated incidence? You can see in South Africa fairly high prevalence and incidence, prevalence particularly high in Vulindlela. Zimbabwe and South Africa, the Soweto site, also fairly high prevalence and related incidence in those communities. With respect to incidence differences in intervention versus control communities, a couple of key findings I wanted to highlight. Overall, we achieved a reduction in HIV incidence in intervention versus control communities of 14%. Those aged 25 to 32 performed better than those aged 18 to 24 with respect to incidence reduction. Women 25 to 32 years old, we received a reduction of 30% in that particular age category. There was no incident effect in women aged 18 to 24, and the number of incident cases for young and old men was too few for us to, the number of incident cases in young and old men was too few for us to conduct a suitable evaluation of the effect of the intervention on incidence amongst this particular group. With respect to some of our secondary behavioral outcomes, the number of sexual partners reported by HIV-positive individuals was lower by 8%, and the number of sexual partners, particularly amongst HIV-positive men, was lower by 18%. This was significant. Reductions in multiple sexual partners, again, among sexually active HIV-infected persons was reduced by 30%. And again, HIV-positive infected men were a key driver of this effect, with the reduction of, this is a magic thing, it moves so quickly. With the reduction of about 30% amongst HIV-infected men. Project Accept allows us to increase HIV testing, particularly amongst men again. We increased HIV testing by 45% amongst men and 15% amongst women. Now, this was significant improvements in testing rates, particularly amongst men and young people. And even though many women in many of these countries had been testing through antenatal clinics, this is a scary thing. It just moves. And even though many women had been testing in antenatal clinics, this increase in HIV testing amongst women was also significant. With respect to social norms, regarding HIV testing, we found that this was also more favorable in intervention communities compared to standard VCT communities. The intervention was safe. There was no increase in negative life events in intervention communities, so no increase in violence towards women, breakup of marriage, or sexual relationships in the intervention arm. I've got 3 more slides, as you saw as I went along. I started off the presentation really asking a key question that occupied our minds at the time of doing the study. To what degree does large-scale population knowledge of HIV infection reduce the scale of the epidemic? And I want to say that we think in NIMH Project Accept, we managed to achieve part of what we set out to do. We showed that we are able to implement and evaluate entire communities. We're able to implement and evaluate interventions in entire communities. We were able to substantially increase the uptake of HIV testing and HIV case detection, particularly in communities that were not, that are under-resourced, that are rural, and in target groups that we were not reaching before. I think we also show that it's possible to achieve process goals, but not without considerable cost. A huge amount of effort mounting this intervention in these communities and achieving some of the process data that I showed you. I think it's also clear that Project Accept is able to engage men in community-based HIV testing programs. Now, the blue arrows indicate to you what we've achieved through Project Accept, what we're trying to do. Mobilize communities, encourage widespread HIV testing. With the HIV negatives and positives, we attempted to reduce risk behavior and provide social support right at the bottom. The 2 yellow arrows indicate how much has changed in the last 10 years since we started this trial and what is now increasingly available to us. Many more prevention strategies and devices, and also considerably increased access to care and treatment. And I think it's within that context that we like to view our modest reduction of HIV incidence through this population level study of 14%. We think that this 14% provides a benchmark for many of the other studies that you'll hear about today. We hope that the additions of other components that many of those studies will provide, referral and maintenance in care, early treatment, male circumcision, pre-exposure prophylaxis, but all of those things might be successful in achieving greater reductions of HIV incidence in entire communities. Allow me to thank my many colleagues and investigators who conceptualized the study. We received really important and consistent and ongoing support from our NIMH program officer. The core lab were outstanding, as was the statistical core in Prague. And lastly, studies of this nature, I think, are transformative. They transformed certainly my life and the life of many of our investigators working on the study. But I think we were really able to do it with the help of amazing staff on the ground who implemented this vision. So thank you to all of them, and that's just in time. Thanks very much.